Okay, so I've got my Revit model open, and it's a 3D view, which is what you need to take into Lumion, but, well, I've already done a demo on this, so I've got a view there called Lumion, but I'll just repeat that. So I'm going to duplicate this view, and then rename it, and I'll call it Lumion Export. And it's good just to have a view like that you use for exporting to Lumion, so that you can hide things that you don't want in Lumion. So the trees especially aren't compatible with Lumion, so I'm just going to hide the category, all the plants. Everything else is probably okay. I might check my phases. So, oh yeah, it's on previous and new. Show complete is basically the same, but the graphics are slightly different with previous and new, so I think I'll go to show complete. And that's probably enough, so let's see what's happening there. I didn't put the padding for that round, but that's why I'll leave that. So the Lumion tab then has a few options. That live export works really well if you're working on your own computer, but with these it seems to have a few issues. So it's probably better just to use export, and I'll just stick with that one. So if you click on that export button, then you generally can just leave that on the default settings, but I might just take that up a little bit more because it's a bit low, so I'm going to just make sure that's right on normal. Yeah, we'll leave everything else. With the new version, there's a couple of extra options there that are worth looking at, but with this one, that's fine. As long as we've got collect textures, that's the most important thing. And normally you don't want geometry optimization, you don't need that, unless you have issues with the file becoming too big. So that's it. Sometimes they have Unicode support for some reason, but I'm not sure exactly if you need that. So I'm just going to leave that unticked and export, and then give it a name and make sure I know where it's going. So I might even just make a new folder just for Lumion. There we go. And give it a sensible name like Lumion Export. So that shouldn't take too long, usually. There we go. Okay, so now into Lumion, and you've got a choice of these basic starting scenes. The plain grass is fine, but often for urban things I'll just do a white plain, and but you know, any of those work. So I'll do white though, and we'll get a big white plain. And then to import, you click on the little folder icon in that Objects tab there, and once you click import, then this button comes up. You've got to click on that green disk icon, import new model, and then go and find the file you just exported. And so it should collect all the texture files that you've used for your materials, and they should come through. So once you click open and then just tick, that adds it to the library, and then you'll see this cursor come up, or the crosshairs, and generally just want to keep it in the middle of the screen. Just don't go too far off to the side. If you go, I think it's more than 1 kilometre away, you'll start to have issues. I can't remember the exact size, but definitely no more than a few kilometres. But if you keep it in the middle, it does work better. So make sure you just place it once, and often if you've done it in Revit with levels that are a fair distance above sea level, then the model is going to be that high above your plane. So it's floating right up in the sky there. So here I'm using the navigation keys to go backwards, so combination of using the S key, which moves back, but also I'm rolling the wheel to make it go faster, and you can also use Shift with S to make it go faster as well. The arrow keys work as well, so forwards and backwards arrows, but you tend to use W and S to go forwards and backwards because you've got A, D, and then Q and D all grouped together. That's the standard navigation keys. And to see those come up, if you go to the little question mark and just hover over that in the corner, it tells you all of those keys on the top right there. So I can see my model up in the sky, and so you've got two choices. We can either lift our view up to see that model, and I'll do that using the Q key. I can raise the camera, but we can also lower the model closer to the plane, and it's good to try that because then you get used to selecting the model. So here you can see I'm still in this place objects mode, and I'm then going to change to the change height option there in that objects panel. So just under move you've got change height, and then what you'll see, if you hover, sometimes you've got to hover near the model to make this node come up. So when it's blue, that means it's selected. So if I then click on it, it'll then let me drag that down and lower it closer to the plane, but I don't want to go too close. So if you go below, of course that's going to hide things we've made, so I just want to keep it so that all of the things I've modelled, including the car park, are above that plane. So now I'm just going to lower the camera using the E key, and maybe even zoom in a bit, and then just lower it down and just make sure there's nothing there touching the ground, because we don't want to go below that plane. Also, it's good to keep that node, so it's easily selectable later. You've got to be able to come back to that that selection node to be able to select the model and update it later when you make changes. So I don't want that to go too far down below the plane either. So that's probably a good position for it. Maybe you can go a little bit down. So the other issue there is when we do views that do view off into the horizon, we don't want to be able to see our plane, or our ground surface obviously floating too high in the air. So that's probably a good place, and then I'll navigate back in. This is, I think, my main problem with Lumion, or the issue that I've got, is the navigation's a little bit slow compared to other CAD and graphics programs, because you essentially just have those navigation keys like a 3D game, and that's the only way of getting around. So again, WASD, and then you can see there with the model, it already looks okay because things like the brick texture and everything else have come across from Revit. So there are textures though in Lumion which are better than almost all of the Revit materials. You don't have to change everything, so if things look good, like the bricks, they look okay, I think, you can leave those, but if you want to change something, that's a good thing to start with. Over on the left you've got the different basic modes that you have in what's called build mode, which is where we're working. So as you hover, you can see the different options there. So it's on objects, and then you've got materials, landscape and weather. If you go to materials, then you can select anything in Revit that has a different material. So it's all grouped by material. And so yes, oh cool, awesome. Yep. So I'll just do this grass. I'm just going to select that. Then the material palette comes up. So it's kind of the opposite to Revit. And then you can go to the different preset materials. I'll just go to nature, and it's got a huge selection of grass materials. And you can see there they're not tiled like the Revit ones. And if you flick between them, you can see instantly how they look. You can just change the scale and all sorts of things, but usually they work pretty well out of the box. So there we go, I'm happy with that one. Or maybe let's try one more. No, I'm happy with that. Okay, so then once you've got the material that you want, tick to confirm, because there's no undo in Lumion, unlike other programs. So it's cross if you want to get out of it, otherwise tick, and if you want to change it, then you've got to go and manually change to something else. There's no undo. So maybe we'll just do a couple of other things, and then look at updating the model and having made some changes in Revit, and I'll finish there. So I'll just go back to objects mode, and now I want to place a few things. So I'll go to, well, people are one of the most common things you want to place. So I'll go to people, animals, and then click on the little icon that comes up, and that brings up the library of people. This comes from gaming software, so they're pretty gaming or gamey, and but you can choose. Yeah, you can choose. I know you can choose more stylish ones. The ones that are walking do have inbuilt motion, and if you don't make them walk, they'll just walk on the spot. But you can make them, have a direction, and I'll go through how to make them walk later, or how to make them move. So if you don't want them to move, you'll see that a lot of them have idle in the name. He's a walking one, he's a walking one, he's an idle one. So there we go. So we'll stick this guy the other way, and yeah, he's looking at how wonderful the houses are. And we can, oh yeah, so I'm just switching here to rotate, and then you can just click and drag on the icon and of course change the direction they're facing. And it's the same with all the objects. So if we then go to maybe transport, and you've got a huge selection of vehicles, boats, buses, and then of course cars. It's a huge selection. Anything that's got Pro on it you can't use with this version, but you can use anything else. And so let's just, they're all a bit old, some of them, but no, this will do. And the other great thing is that it picks up the surfaces you've made in Revit, so there's no worrying about levels or anything like that. It can be a problem when you've got lots of objects, because say we're in here and we try to place it anywhere there, it's going to pick up the door or anything else, or the roof, whatever we're close to. And that's why you have to navigate right in to different areas sometimes. But otherwise it's pretty good. So then I can move this, and of course it should then just follow the surface, and we can have that car following down the road. And then, oh yeah, so the other thing, just so I remembered now, the materials, having said that they do usually come through, things like glass aren't fully compatible. So the Revit glass doesn't translate into the Lumion glass perfectly, so that's one you generally want to reassign. So I'll go back to that and just quickly fix the glass, and you've got them in indoor and outdoor. It's got glass, and I'll just choose clear glass and tick it, and then get some other glass because that was a different material, but I'm going to make them all the same glass. Yeah, as long as they were the same material in Lumion, so all of those doors, they of course had the same material, so they all change, yeah. But I'll probably had 3 or 4 different types of glass that I've got to just go and find, or maybe here's another one. But yeah, it doesn't take that long, usually to find those. Yeah. But you can see there, it's actually pretty good that we've done it after doing the CC, because most of the detail's been resolved, and the model looks fairly believable. Yeah, I kind of like the rainwater heads, believe it or not. Anyhow, so yeah, so okay, so now obviously you can keep going. Maybe I will just show one last standard entourage thing that you'll have, which is nature, which has all your trees and plants, and it's, I've got to say, much better than Revit. You've got a much bigger library, and unlike Revit, they're all unique. So when you place the same tree multiple times, it gives you different versions of the same species or whatever type of tree it is. So I'll just place this one, whatever it is, olive tree or something. Yeah. So if you put one down here, and then another one right next to it, and you'll see they're different. And that's nice. And they do have eucalypts, because they do have quite a lot of gum trees in California, apparently. Yeah, that's it. They've learnt what most Australians don't seem to realise, which is that eucalypts are actually a very destructive species and probably responsible for the ecology we have in Australia. fact that they're dependent on fire, and they probably cause, well, my theory is they cause a lot of the bushfires as their own little survival mechanism. And it's great for the eucalypts, but not so great for all the other species and all the other things that have to live with them. And they poison the ground too. I'm not a big fan of gum trees, but I like the look of them. But yeah, as a thing to live with and grow, they're not my favourite thing. On the other hand, I love willows, and willows, according... Yeah, that's right, I know. Australian native lovers hate them. And I know because my mother's a horticulturalist and she can't stand them because of that. But I grew up with one in my backyard and I like the look of them. So I'll always stick one in. I know once you go to the country, you've got to chop them down though. So that's it. And so I'm going to save the file at this point, and I'm going to come back and do more work on it later. So, the saving process in Lumion's a bit unusual too. Click on the Files icon, and then you've got this Save Scene. Now, I'm never really 100% sure why you have to do this, because you'll see in a minute I'm going to save it in another way. But when you don't do this, things don't seem to work properly. And I've seen it where people haven't done this step and then lost things. So, I'm going to give it a name here. So we'll call it, Glebe Townhouse, houses, and oops, just fix that up. Tick save, and that saves a version. But then to save the file, you've got to go to Save Scene and Models, and then click on that button. And then that then saves the Lumion file format, which is LS7. Don't know why you've got to do the first thing and then this, but that's just the way it is. So again, Glebe, I'll use the same name. Okay, so we're in files mode at the moment. So it's probably not obvious until you get to this point that the mode you're in when you're working at first is this build mode. So the shoveling man will take you back to that build mode. There are other modes like photo and movie as well, which I'll do in a minute. But that's enough to get started. So the last thing I was going to finish up with is how to then bring in changes that you've made in Revit without losing all of this Lumion work. So back into Revit, and I'll make a change. So I've got a gap in my fence there that I want to extend, and this is someone else's family. Oh, it's one that I can stretch though, so I'll go back to my site plan and see if I can extend that fence by stretching with any luck. Pretty sure that will do it. Yes. So then, okay, I've made that simple change. Is there anything else simple I can do? That might do. Yeah. Okay, so I've made that change. I want to then bring that into Lumion. So I'll save the file just in case it crashes. Then click on that export button again. Click export as well again, and then choose the same file I exported to before. Click save, and then yes to override it. So now back into Lumion, and so to update the import, you've got to go back to that imports option and then see if the reload button is active. If it isn't, that means something else is selected. So often the best option there is just to choose one of these transforms, any of them, but move probably is the easiest. And then you've got to move out and find that import node. So I'm zooming out and just hovering over the model. That's my model, of course, but the import node we know is down below, and there it is. So as I hover, I can see my import node, and now I can click on it just once. It's blue, so that means it's selected. Then now you can see the reload button's working. You can change to a different file if you hold down Alt. Then you can choose another file if you've changed the name, but if you haven't changed the name, just click on that button and it will bring across the changes. So it looks like it's frozen, but it's working. There we are, it's done. So now if we go back in, and I'm using Shift and Spacebar is the other one that speeds up those navigation keys. And And there we are, it's brought my change across. The fence is longer, but it's kept all the changes I made in Lumion. So that's it, and so I'll do another demo later on making a simple movie, but yeah, that's definitely enough to get going. So finish there.